The wedding ring wasn't what broke the Korean Mafia boss. It was the 4 words his wife said after taking it off. "I gave you everything." He thought she was leaving because he loved her too little. The truth was far worse. She was leaving because of a secret he had spent 6 years protecting her from. And that secret was about to make her the most wanted woman in Seoul. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Serena's hand closed around the ring before she let herself think about what she was doing. It came off easier than she expected. 4 years, and it just slid over her knuckle like it had been waiting for permission. 2 days earlier, she had stood in this same kitchen and set 2 plates on the table instead of 1, out of habit more than hope. Their anniversary. She hadn't said the word out loud in front of Yoo-jin in a long time. She'd learned that saying it only made the silence after it louder. He didn't come home that night, or the next. She didn't call anyone. She didn't cry in front of the staff. She unset the second plate, put it back in the cabinet, and told herself this was just what the 5th year of marriage to Kang Yoo-jin looked like. You stopped expecting the door to open. You stopped listening for his car. Han Do-sok found her on the terrace the following evening, the city lights doing nothing to warm the air. "He's alive," he said, because that was always the first thing you told a wife married to a man like Yoo-jin. "There was a problem. He'll explain when he can." "He always can," Serena said. "He just doesn't." Han didn't have an answer for that. He respected her too much to lie, and he respected Yoo-jin too much to say what he actually believed, which was that his boss had gotten very good at surviving bullets and very bad at surviving his own marriage. Yoo-jin came home a little after midnight. No warning. No call. Just the sound of the front door and his footsteps, heavier than usual, like the 2 days had cost him something he wasn't going to talk about. Serena was still awake. She'd told herself she'd go to bed at 11. She was still on the couch at midnight, not because she was waiting up, she told herself, but because sleep hadn't wanted her either. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her. There was a cut above his eyebrow, already closing, the kind of small wound he never let anyone fuss over. "You're hurt," she said. "Not a question, just a fact, delivered flat, the way you'd mention the weather." "It's nothing. It's always nothing." She stood up. 2 days, Yoo-jin. Nothing. "I couldn't call." He said it like it was obvious, like she should already understand, the way she'd understood every time before. It wasn't safe. Not safe for who? He didn't answer right away. And that was its own kind of answer. He crossed the room toward her, and for a second, she almost let him close the distance the way she always did, because some old, tired part of her still wanted to check the cut above his eye herself. She didn't move toward him. That was new. She saw it land on his face, a small confusion, like he'd reached for a door that used to open and found it locked. "I'm sorry," he said. He meant it. She could tell he meant it, and that almost made it worse. "You keep saying that." Her voice stayed calm. She'd practiced calm for 2 days, standing alone in a house that felt bigger every time he left it. "You say it, and then it happens again, and I tell myself that's just how it is. I married a man with a dangerous life. I knew that going in." "Then you understand." "I understand you'd rather I sit here not knowing if you're alive than tell me the truth and let me decide if I can carry it." She shook her head slowly. "That's not protecting me, Yoo-jin. That's protecting yourself from having to trust me." He opened his mouth, and for once, nothing came out. In 5 years, she had never seen him without something to say. He negotiated with men who wanted him dead. He'd never once been quiet in front of her like this. She reached up and worked the ring off her finger. He watched her do it the way you'd watch something falling, that you knew you couldn't catch in time. "I gave you everything," she said. Not loud, not shaking, just true. She set the ring on the table between them, gently, like she still respected what it had once meant, even now. "Serena, I'm not doing this to punish you." She picked up the bag she hadn't realized she'd already packed, sitting by the door since that afternoon, like some part of her had decided before the rest of her caught up. "I'm doing it because I don't know how to keep loving someone who protects me from everything except himself." She walked past him. He didn't reach for her. Later, he would wonder if that was the moment he lost her for good, the half-second his hand stayed at his side, instead of closing around her wrist. He told himself he didn't stop her because he owed her the choice. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. He didn't know what he would have said if she'd turned around. The door closed behind her, quiet, no slam, which somehow felt worse than if she'd screamed. Han Do-sok appeared in the hallway a few minutes later, having clearly heard enough to know better than to interrupt sooner. He found Yoo-jin still standing where she'd left him, staring at a ring on a table like it might explain something if he looked at it long enough. "Sir," Han's voice was careful, "there's something you should know before tonight is over." Yoo-jin didn't look up. Words already moving. "Two of the northern families know your wife walked out without protection." Han paused, choosing the next part deliberately. They know exactly what that means. A wife with no name to hide behind isn't just an ex-wife anymore. She's a target with no one standing in front of her. Yoo-jin's hand closed slowly around the ring. Yoo-jin didn't answer Han right away. He set the ring down on the table with more care than the moment probably deserved, like slamming it would make the last hour more real than it already was. "Find out who's talking," he said finally, quietly. "I don't want her name louder than it already is." "And her?" Han asked. "Do we tell her?" No. The word came fast, the way old habits always did. Then, slower, like he was arguing with himself. "Not yet." Han didn't push. He'd learned a long time ago that some of Yoo-jin's decisions couldn't be undone by disagreeing with them in the doorway at 1 a.m. He left to make calls. Yoo-jin stayed with the ring and the quiet, and neither one of them offered him anything close to comfort. Serena, 3 miles away, was learning what silence sounded like when it belonged to her. She'd taken a room above her sister Grace's garage, the kind of small space that used to embarrass her when she pictured other people's lives. Now it just felt like hers. No staff. No car waiting outside. Just a mattress. A window that stuck when it rained, and a version of herself she hadn't spoken to in years. Grace stood in the doorway that first morning, with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that said she'd been waiting 5 years to have this conversation. "You could stay here as long as you want," Grace said. "You know that." "I know. You could also let him send money. Nobody would blame you." Serena wrapped both hands around the mug. "I'm not doing this to be stubborn." "Then why?" "Because every time I took something from him, I owed him something back, even if he never said it." She looked out the stuck window at the gray morning. "I don't want to owe anyone anything anymore. I want to build something that's just mine." Grace didn't understand it completely, not yet, but she recognized the tone. It was the same one Serena used to have years ago, before the marriage, before the wealth and the quiet and the plates set for one. Grace had missed that voice more than she'd admit out loud. 2 days later, Serena found the Community Arts Center. It sat 2 streets from where she'd grown up, windows boarded, the old mural on the side wall faded almost to nothing. She remembered it full once, remembered dragging Grace there after school to watch other kids paint and dance, and pretend to be anyone they wanted. It had closed the year their mother got sick. Serena had never stopped thinking about it, not really, just buried the thought under years of galas and empty dinners and a husband who filled rooms with power instead of warmth. The building needed everything: new wiring, new floors, a director willing to work for almost nothing. Serena stood in the dust and broken glass, and felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she wanted to admit. She felt useful. The work was slow, and it was hers. She learned to argue with contractors. She learned the names of every kid who wandered in from the block just to see what the noise was about. One boy, maybe 8 years old, watched her patch a hole in the drywall and asked if she used to be rich. "I used to be a lot of things," she told him, and he laughed like that was the funniest answer he'd ever heard, and something in her chest loosened for the first time in months. What she didn't know was that she wasn't rebuilding that center alone. Across the street, in a car with tinted windows, a man named Jung watched her unlock the front doors every morning at 8. He reported to Han. Han reported to Yoo-jin. 3 times in the first 2 weeks, Jung quietly intervened before trouble found her. once turning away a man who'd been asking too many specific questions about her schedule, twice redirecting deliveries that weren't deliveries at all. Serena never saw any of it. She only noticed, sometimes, a strange feeling of being watched, and told herself it was just the neighborhood, just old instincts from a life she was trying to leave behind. She was wrong, and the not knowing would cost her later. Yujin, meanwhile, was losing a different kind of battle. Chairman O summoned him on a Thursday, in the private room at the top of the Cheongye Tower, where the old man conducted business the way his father had, slow and deliberate, like patience itself was a weapon. "You've been distracted," O said, not a question. "I'm handling it. You're handling a woman who left you." O's voice didn't rise. It never needed to. The northern families smell weakness. Weakness in you becomes weakness in all of us. She's not your concern. She's everyone's concern the moment she's unprotected, and the wrong people know it. O set down his tea with exact precision. "I won't approve resources for a personal matter, not while the syndicate is exposed." Yujin left that meeting with nothing, which meant Jung's protection detail existed on Yujin's own money, his own men, quietly pulled from other operations, a debt he was accumulating with no one but himself. He told himself it was enough that she was safe. He told himself that counted as love. It didn't feel like enough, not anymore, and some nights he sat in his office with her ring still on his desk and understood, slowly, painfully, that all the protection in the world hadn't once made her feel chosen. 3 weeks in, Serena stood in the half-finished center holding an envelope that had come with no return address, just her name, typed clean across the front. Inside were photocopies, financial records, old and yellowed at the edges, dated almost 6 years back. Her own name appeared twice, buried in a string of numbers she didn't understand at first. A handwritten note was clipped to the top page. No signature, just 4 words. "You already changed everything." Serena read it twice, then a third time, her hands going still against the paper. She had no memory of these documents, no memory of mattering to anything beyond her own small, ordinary life 6 years ago. But someone believed she had, and someone wanted her to know it. Serena didn't sleep that night. She sat at the small table in Grace's garage apartment, with the pages spread out in front of her, reading the same numbers over and over until they stopped looking like numbers and started looking like a door she hadn't known was there. By morning, she'd made a decision. She was done wondering. She called Yujin's office instead of his cell, because some stubborn part of her still needed the distance a receptionist gave her, still needed to feel like she was choosing this and not being pulled back in. He cleared his afternoon before she finished the sentence. They met at his office, not the house, neutral ground or as close to it as either of them could get. Serena set the envelope on his desk without sitting down. "Tell me what this is." Yujin looked at the pages for a long moment before he looked at her. That pause told her more than anything he could have said. He recognized them instantly. "Where did you get this?" "That's not the question I asked." He sat back, and she watched something in his face give way, slow, like a wall losing its foundation 1 brick at a time. 6 years ago, you found irregularities in a shipment ledger. You mentioned it to me over dinner, like it was nothing. A curiosity. You had no idea what you'd actually found. What did I find? Proof that 3 of my own men were moving money to a rival family. Preparing to move against me. His voice stayed even, but his hands weren't. If it had gone through, I'd be dead. Probably you too. Serena's chest went tight. So I stopped it. You stopped it without knowing you'd stopped anything. He said it quietly, like the words had been sitting in him a long time, waiting for permission. I buried every trace connecting you to it, erased your name from every file, made sure no one outside 3 people ever learned what you'd done. Why would you hide that from me? Her voice cracked on the last word, the first real crack since she'd walked out with the ring 3 weeks ago. That's not something to bury, Yujin. That's something to be proud of. If anyone had known you exposed a coup against me, you'd have been a target for the rest of your life. Every enemy I've ever made would have known exactly where to aim. He stood, and around the desk, stopped short of reaching for her. I didn't erase what you did to punish you. I erased it to keep you breathing. Before we go any further, I want to know where you're watching this from tonight. Drop your city in the comments, because Serena's next question is about to change everything Yujin thought he understood about love. She stared at him, and for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't looking at the mafia boss everyone else saw. She was looking at a man who had made one desperate, quiet choice, and let it quietly define every year after it. "That's why you pulled away," she said, understanding, arriving slower than the anger, and somehow worse. "Not because you stopped loving me, because you were scared of what loving me honestly might cost me." "Yes. Do you understand what that cost me instead?" Her voice finally broke fully. "I spent years thinking I wasn't enough to be trusted with your world. I thought you were ashamed of me, or tired of me, or waiting for something better. I built an entire version of our marriage out of your silence, Yujin, and it was wrong, and you let it be wrong, because you'd rather I hate you a little than fear for my life a lot." He had no answer for that. For once, the man who negotiated peace between armed men standing in a room had nothing. Han Do-sek, who had been waiting outside, stepped in without being asked, because he'd carried his own piece of this for 6 years, and watching Yujin fail to say it was more than he could stand. "I told him to tell you," Han said. Serena turned. "Years ago, I told him you deserved to know what you'd done, that you deserved to decide for yourself what risk you could carry. He wouldn't listen." Yujin's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "You had someone telling you the truth," Serena said softly, "and you still chose the lie." "I chose to protect your life." "Did you ever protect my heart?" she asked, "the way you protected my life?" The silence that followed lasted long enough to become its own answer. Yujin sank into the chair behind him, not from weakness, not from injury, but because there was nothing left standing on. He'd spent 6 years believing the secret was an act of love. Watching her face now, he understood for the first time that it had only ever been an act of fear wearing love's clothes. "I don't know how to make this right," he said. "I'm not asking you to make it right." Serena picked the envelope back up, folded it carefully, the way you'd fold something you weren't ready to throw away yet. "I understand why you did it. I do. But understanding you isn't the same as trusting you again. You don't get both just because you finally told me the truth." She left before he could find words for that either. Han watched his boss sit motionless in the chair, staring at nothing, and made a decision of his own. He pulled out his phone and sent a short message to a contact he trusted less every year, asking a question that would matter more than he knew by morning. That contact was already 3 steps ahead of him. By the time Yujin's phone rang past midnight, the man on the other end wasn't calling with news. He was calling with terms. Somewhere along the last 3 weeks, Serena's name and the story behind it had reached someone inside Yujin's own circle, someone he'd trusted enough to never watch closely. "You have something I want," the voice said, "and I have someone you can't afford to lose twice." "Who is this?" Yujin said, though some part of him already suspected. "Someone who's been patient a long time." The voice was calm, almost friendly, which made it worse. "Your wife walked out of your protection without a name to hide behind. Took some work finding her, but I did. She's fine. For now, what happens next depends on how reasonable you're willing to be. Say what you want. Step down, hand the northern routes to people who understand this business doesn't have room for men distracted by feelings. Do that, and your wife stays exactly as untouched as she is right now." The line went dead before Yujin could answer, which told him everything about how sure this man was of his position. Han was already moving, phone against his ear, coordinating men Yujin hadn't authorized, calling in favors from people Yujin didn't know he still had. When Yujin looked up, Han met his eyes without flinching. "I already sent someone to Grace's place," Han said. "She wasn't there. Neither was Serena." "Where?" "The center. She's still working nights, finishing the mural room." Han was already pulling on his jacket. "I have 2 men headed there now." Chairman O summoned Yujin before dawn, and for once, Yujin almost didn't go. He went anyway, because refusing O outright while his wife's safety hung in the balance felt like a fight he couldn't afford to pick twice in one night. "Give her up," O said, without preamble, the tea in front of him untouched. "Publicly, let the northern families see you, cut the weakness loose. It ends the threat, and it ends the talk that you've gone soft. No. O's expression didn't change, which was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. You'd choose one woman over everything your father built. I'd choose the truth, Eugene said, and heard himself say it, and understood he meant it in a way he hadn't 3 weeks ago. You've spent decades telling yourself, love makes men weak. It didn't make me weak. Hiding love did. I'm done hiding anything. O dismissed him without another word, and Eugene walked out of that tower for what he suspected was the last time as a man O would call an ally. Serena, meanwhile, hadn't waited for anyone to save her. She'd been in the mural room when Jung, the man who'd watched over her for weeks without her knowing his name, finally introduced himself and told her, fast and low, that they needed to leave. She didn't argue about the plan. She argued about the kids still inside, 2 teenagers finishing a mural after hours, because it was the only quiet place either of them had. We're not leaving them, she said, already moving toward the back room, and Jung, who'd been given orders to protect 1 woman, found himself protecting 3. They got the teenagers out through the loading door as 2 cars pulled up out front, men stepping out with the unhurried confidence of people who didn't expect resistance. Serena's pulse hammered, but her hands stayed steady on the fire door, holding it for the last kid through. This was not the woman anyone in that syndicate remembered. By the time Eugene and Han arrived, the standoff had already tightened into something close to a siege. Han's men held the front. The insiders' men held the street. Somewhere in the middle of it, Eugene realized the fight he was about to have wasn't the fight that would actually save anyone. If I go in shooting, Eugene said quietly to Han, she might be caught in it. If I negotiate, they'll never let this go. Not really. Not while I still have something to protect. Then, take away what they want. Eugene looked at him. Burn it down yourself, Han said. All of it. The routes, the accounts, everything that makes you worth threatening. Hand it to the authorities before he can use it against you. There's nothing left to hold hostage if there's nothing left to take. It was the kind of decision that ended empires. Eugene had spent his whole life building something out of fear and control, and Han was asking him to burn it to the ground in a single night, in exchange for a woman who had already told him understanding wasn't the same as trust. He did it anyway. He called a number he'd kept for exactly this kind of leverage, a contact inside the financial crimes division he'd cultivated for years as insurance, and he gave them everything. 6 years of records. Every account, every route, every name, including his own. Within the hour, sirens replaced silence. The insiders' men scattered the moment they realized what was coming, because loyalty built on fear evaporates the second fear point somewhere else. The standoff broke apart before a single shot answered another. Serena found Eugene standing outside the center as police lights swept red and blue across the broken pavement. His knuckles split from a fight he'd barely needed to win, his empire dismantling itself in real time on phones and radios all around him. She walked toward him without deciding to. He watched her come the way he'd watched her leave weeks ago, like he still didn't quite believe he was allowed to hope. You gave it all up, she said. There wasn't anything in it worth keeping if it meant losing you twice. She reached for his bloodied hand, turned it over gently, the way she used to when they were younger, and neither of them owned anything worth protecting yet. I'm not asking you to fix this by coming back to me, Eugene said, and his voice, always so certain in every other room, came out unsteady in this one. I gave up the empire because it was rotten and because you deserved better than a man who needed it more than he needed you, but I won't ask you to come home, not after everything I cost you. I don't think I've earned the right to ask that anymore. Serena didn't answer right away. She stood there, holding his hand under the flashing lights, watching the only life he'd ever known collapse quietly behind him, and said nothing at all. Serena said nothing that night, and Eugene didn't ask her to. He let go of her hand first, gently, like he understood that holding on any longer would turn a moment of grace into a demand. The weeks after moved slower than either of them expected. Eugene sold what remained legally his to sell. The towers, the shipping contracts, the properties built on money he no longer wanted to trace back through. He kept almost nothing for himself. Most of it went into a fund. The authorities allowed him to direct toward the neighborhoods his old operations had quietly bled dry for years, the community center among them. He testified when they asked him to. He didn't ask for protection in return. Chairman O's remaining loyalists made sure the trial was ugly, but Yu Jin sat through every session without flinching, because for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to defend except the truth. He didn't call Serena. He didn't send flowers or lawyers or apologies dressed up as gifts. He simply did the work, month after month, and let her decide on her own time whether that meant anything. Grace noticed before Serena said a word about it. "He's still showing up," Grace said one evening, nodding toward the article on Serena's laptop screen, another quiet piece about the redevelopment fund, his name mentioned only once, buried near the bottom. Most men make one grand gesture and disappear. He's just doing it, over and over, not asking anyone to notice. "I know," Serena said. "So what are you waiting for?" Serena closed the laptop. "I'm not waiting for him to prove he loves me. I already know he does. I'm waiting to find out if I can trust that love without losing myself in it again." Grace sat beside her, quiet for a moment. "Then don't choose out of fear. And don't choose out of obligation either, just because he finally did the right thing. Choose because of what your heart actually wants, once it's not scared anymore." It was the kind of sentence Serena carried with her for weeks, turning it over every time she stood in the center that was, at last, almost finished. The Community Arts Center reopened on a bright Saturday in early spring, 5 months after the night the syndicate fell apart under its own weight. New paint, new windows. The mural the two teenagers had been finishing that night now covered an entire wall, bright and unafraid. Exactly the kind of place Serena had once dreamed about before she let herself forget how to dream at all. Children filled the building within the hour. Laughter bounced off walls that had been silent for years. Serena stood near the door greeting families, and it took her a moment to notice him near the back, half hidden by a crowd of parents, watching a room full of kids paint like he had no right to be proud of it, and couldn't quite stop himself anyway. He didn't approach her. He never did anymore, not since that night outside the center. He watched the mural, watched the children, watched the life she'd built exactly the way she'd hoped it would look, and after a while, he turned toward the door like a man who'd only come to see it once and didn't plan on staying. Serena caught up to him on the front steps. "You weren't going to say goodbye?" He turned, surprised, like he hadn't expected her to notice, let alone follow. "I didn't want to make today about me. This is yours. You built it. We built it," she said. "Even if you never let anyone see your name on it." He didn't answer that. He'd stopped needing credit for anything months ago, and it showed in the way he stood now, lighter somehow, like a man who'd finally put down something heavy he'd been carrying his whole life. Serena reached into her pocket. She'd thought about this moment more times than she wanted to admit, rehearsed it, doubted it, nearly talked herself out of it twice. But watching him stand there, asking nothing, expecting nothing, she understood Grace had been right. This wasn't fear. It wasn't obligation. It was simply what her heart wanted, now that it wasn't scared anymore. She didn't hand him back the old ring. That one was still sitting in a drawer somewhere, a piece of a marriage built on silence and sacrifice, and two people who loved each other without ever really seeing each other. This was something new, small and simple, chosen without anyone watching. She placed it in his open hand. "This one isn't built on sacrifice," she said. "It's built on truth." His hand closed around it, trembling in a way she'd never once seen from him, not during standoffs, not during the trial, not during any of the moments the rest of the world had watched him stay perfectly composed. If stories like this one stay with you long after they end, I hope you'll stay too. Subscribe, and let's keep finding these unforgettable journeys together. "Can we start over?" Yu Jin asked quietly. Serena looked at him for a long moment, the sound of children laughing behind them, spring light warm on the steps where a marriage had once ended, and was now, carefully, becoming something else entirely. "No," she said. His face fell, just slightly, before she reached for his hand and laced her fingers through his. "Let's start honestly," she said. and for the first time in 5 years, neither of them was protecting anything from the other at all.